Good evening. I have this privilege that I'm always given this opportunity to talk to you about basically whatever I find interesting, and I try to find topics that are interesting for you, but also for me to research and find my position on, which when you have a design office you don't usually have the time for. But I really, as I said, I enjoy doing that, and this time I want to talk about functionalism, because it's a term that used to really be very popular, at least when I started to study, which is quite a while ago. And I want to, tell you everything I know about it, and also look together with you where it's going. My presentation will be structured like this. I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, what I'm doing. Then I'm going to touch on the history of functionalism. Then I'm going to show you some people that were really the big proponents of functionalism and some critics. And then in the end, I'm going to try to find a solution, because one of the reasons we talk about functionalism is because designers want to find why they do what they do in the way they do it. You know, when you are starting your career as a student, and your career has already started, one of the problems that I encounter, and I see other students encountering, is that when you are given the task to assign a shape to an object, there is an artistic moment where all the ergonomics and all the technology doesn't help you. You have the job to, say, make a lemon press. You know that there's a lemon and you want to have the juice in the end. How do you go about that? But that doesn't tell you what this thing should look like. And whenever you search for an answer for that, you come across ethical questions. Why would you choose this shape? Why would you do that? And functionalism was one of the possible answers to that question. So, who am I? I'm standing in front of you, so it's very redundant. I also have a picture, but this is taken at the Barcelona pavilion from Mies van der Rohe, so I'm very happy about this picture, and it shows a little bit what I am. I'm trying to be well coordinated in my dress, etc., etc. This have been my occupations. It started off 6 years of just playing, as every little kid does. Then I went 12 years to school. Then I had 1 year of civil service. You had the choice as a male in Germany of doing that or the military. Then I studied 8 years in academy, because I changed from one school, design school, to the other, because the first one wasn't good enough for me. And then I finished with a diploma degree. My educational or academic career continued by teaching for 12 years, and now I think I'm in the 13th year lecturing here. My teaching was at Art Center. Pasadena had a campus in Switzerland at the time, and they hired me as the product design department chairman when I was still fairly young for the job. I was 31. And then I worked in different other design schools in France and in Switzerland, and traveling around lecturing. My professional career started with an internship, so these boxes are not proportionate to the length of the stay. I just did half a year of internship in Pentagram in London. That was an office for graphic design, architecture, and product design, and the product design part was small. There were 60 people in total, and me being raised as an Anglophile, my parents spoke some English, because of my father's job in South Africa, where I was born. But also I wanted to see a different culture, a different country, travel around, and I recommend you all do the same. It's very instructive. And then I was hired, when I had my diploma in frog design, which was a pretty good office at the time. It was so good that Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, traveling the world and looking for the best design office to give the jobs to, picked frog design and said to my former boss, here's $5 million over 5 years. You have to open an office in the Silicon Valley, though. I visited that office, but I was located in the Black Forest office where the whole company originated. And I never worked on Apple stuff, but I saw colleagues working and sweating over that. And I had a great time at frog design, I have to say. During my time teaching at Art Center, I opened my own design office, Views Design, which is now like 30 in the 35th year. That tells you how old I am. I love being a designer, I have to tell you, and that is something we share, the enthusiasm for the profession, and something I want to share with you. So you see, somebody can Work his whole life in design and still like it. My background is international. Good part of it is not my doing at all, so it's not something I'm proud of. You know, patriotism is something that's foreign for me. Nationalism is not my forte. I see myself as a European. If people say, how do you feel? You know, I'm a European. And by passport and parents and where I grew up, I'm German. But I was born in South Africa because my father was there 5 years. My ancestors are Swedish, which is where my name comes from. I love to visit and spend half of my time in the United States, thanks to my American girlfriend I met in Paris. You don't know it, but it's every woman's dream to move to Paris and have a German boyfriend, right? I spent a lot of time in Korea. They had an exchange program for designers, and I was there 3 consecutive years for an entire month. Not a long time compared to my stays in other countries, but it was very interesting for me to get an access to a specific Asian culture. Then I lived many years in Switzerland. I did my internship in London, and that influenced my English. Now it's watered down because of my American influences. So it's better for you to understand me, I guess. I love and often travel to Italy. As a student, I did a 2-month trip by bicycle, almost north to south. Spent a lot of time there. It's a very German thing to do. Since the Middle Ages, people like to go, particularly when it's cold in Germany, go to the warmth and the land of the lemons, as we say. Or in Italian, nelle paese dei limoni. And I live in France now half of my time. Why? Good question. Very private choice. I love Paris. Paris is an exciting city, has been the capital of France and the capital of the Western world for centuries, really. It's a little bit like New York in Europe, you know. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, or it's just a cultural magnet. So I love living there. There's a little bit about myself. I like to eat. I like to drink. This is some stuff I cooked. I like to cook too. This is a orange duck, canard à l'orange. I did not make this martini. I like fine arts. Gerhard Richter just saw a fabulous exhibition when it comes to Los Angeles. You've got to see that. I'm sure it will come here. It's probably the most important post-war German artist. I like to travel. You do not need to listen to me playing the guitar. That's a privilege because, you know, it's not so nice to listen to that. I'm still a beginner. Same goes for the saxophone. This is Tanguy, an exhibition that I saw recently. I like to read. The best book I read last year was The Glassmaker. It was a fiction story about the tradition of glassmaking in Venice. And since I visited Venice with my friends, it was a perfect match. The book next to it was written by my friend, and I designed the cover. It's a quirky book. He writes books for fun. It's not his job. He doesn't live off that. He sells them on Amazon, but he's not considering himself a writer primarily. And I like to bike. So that's one part of me, because I think it's good if you get to know me a little bit better. Now, my person consists of much more than my passions, hobbies, and occupations. I also am creating 8.5 tons of CO2 per year. That puts me in a high bracket. That's not good. I try to do less. Since I live half here in Europe, I fly back and forth 4 times. That's bad. I do not have a car, which of course, as you know, is impossible in California, so I'm driving my girlfriend's car here. But in Paris, I don't have a car, so when I travel usually with a high-speed train and rent a car when I need to go somewhere where I can't access with transportation. But still, you know, that's considering not having a car, just lifestyle. And so if every person on the planet would use as much or produce as much CO2, we'd be in deep trouble. It's actually much worse, because I design coffee machines, and I designed dozens of coffee machines. You probably won't find a lot of people who designed more coffee machines than I did. And coffee machines are a nice thing for people that drink coffee, which, by the way, I don't. But I like the smell, and I like the ceremony around it. The problem is that one time, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, my client Jura gave me a trophy for having sold 1 million machines with my design. That, I can't see that because it reflects, that equals 90,000 tons of CO2 for the production, for the consumption, electric energy, etc. It's much more, it's 400,000. And then at the end, if you want to recycle or get rid of it, that's another 10,000 tons. Now, there are probably more than 2 million machines that I design on the market now and already off the market. And that shows you a little bit the responsibility that we have as a designers. Our work impacts the world much more than our own personal CO2 footprint. And that should be for you the challenge to really think what you do to do that in the best way and in the most environmental friendly way, and really take care that all you do, never let this aspect of your work get out of sight. So what do? I do design, and I like to joke that if you ask 3 designers what design is, the definition, I could ask you, you'll get 4 opinions. It's a very complex subject, that's one reason. The other one is that the history of our profession is fairly recent if you compare it to that one of an architect, because, you have 4,000-year-old pyramids and houses. But industrial design only started really as a profession after the Industrial Revolution, when there was serial production, and you needed a specialist to deal with that. So my definition is this here. I want you to read that, and I'll explain and go into the detail. It's a professional activity. And professional means I'm going to charge money for that. And, there's still some clients around that are surprised by that. I don't want to tell them how much fun it is because they aren't going to charge me otherwise, but you're going to charge money for that. And it's an activity. It's not on its own. You have to do something for it. You're developing things, so you create. And it's not same old, but you'll do innovative things. You'll do things that haven't been there before. You will provide solutions. You will solve problems. You do all that for specific markets, because if it doesn't sell, then you won't get any money. Nobody will pay you. And you want to live with that, right? And it's for a brand, not only for a market, but a brand. The product has to have an identity. It has to reflect that brand, ideally. It's an iterative process, which means it's going to be step by step. It's not some mumbo-jumbo, at night, moonlight with a cat on my shoulder, but it's a process that you can explain to clients, and you can make them feel better about the money they give you before they know you and before they know what you're going to produce. Well, to be honest, usually are paid after the first presentation, so they have seen something. You're not fishing for ideas. You're going through a process, You're doing it step by step, and you have a worked out process, and each and every designer has not only his or her own process, but it may differ very well from project to project, It's the difference whether you design the interface for a gas chromatograph or for you design a rubber duck. Both of which I've done, by the way. A good question is half the answer. That's the analytic part of the design process. And the specificity of our profession is that we do this analysis and then the synthesis, And synthetic means you're connecting the dots. Why is this so important? Because it needs different approaches and different personalities almost. To be analytic, you have to be very precise, meticulous. You have to go through, you have to be very conscientious. And to be synthetic, you have to have a wild side. You have to be creative. You have to go a bit crazy. And without that craziness, I think you're never going to be a good designer. And particularly with AI, I think that's one thing that machines will have a hard time doing. Making things that are benignly weird, that are difficult to explain, because AI, large language models, they know everything. They can create every possible combination of things, but they don't know what's good and bad. So one thing is you have to be able to evaluate, to analyze from a human viewpoint, which AI will have a hard time doing. And the other thing is you have to combine things in a way that's crazy enough that nobody did it before, and uncrazy enough that it's producible, feasible, and sellable. I work in these 6 areas. I'm a studied product designer. I do packaging design, interface design, anything UX, UI. Some people like to use that. I don't care really about the terminology as much, as same as whether it's product design or industrial design. There are so many definitions out. I don't care as long as they let me do it. And then I do graphic design and corporate design. I'll show you some examples. These are medical devices. On the left is a container that has phase-changing material as insulators, so it keeps blood at a precise temperature for much longer than your average camping bag would. You know, that it's not just this granular ice that you put in your camping box, but a special material. And on the right, you see a pupillometer, which is used in ER rooms when somebody is in a coma. It looks like one of these thermometers, these infrared thermometers for $20, but it costs $50,000. It's a proprietary technology. It's like this pistol-shaped thing that you shoot a light flash in the eye of somebody in a coma by lifting the eyelid and shooting it in there and measuring the reaction time so you can see whether the person is brain dead or not. And then you do that in certain intervals and you can see whether it deteriorates or ameliorates. And so I started doing this interface, and then I started to do the product design for them too. It's a very, very interesting client. There's a client that makes as much money as the company Alessi that you may have heard of with one single product. And the interesting thing about it is that as a designer you say, well, you know, you should do that better. You should make that look like this and look like that. And they say, wait a moment, Wolfgang, all our livelihood depends on this one product. Are you really sure? And that makes you think not only once or twice, that makes you think really hard that what you recommend to them is the best, that makes them safe and secure and following your advice. It was an interesting experience. Here, coffee machines on the left for Jura, that's on the market. On the right, from a different client, all in stainless steel. These are remote controls. It was an interesting project. It's a client in Germany that does remote controls for model airplanes, model cars, etc., etc. And what I learned is that to fly a model airplane, you're underlying the same physical laws as flying a real plane. So it's similarly complex. And the interface, which I also designed, it's got really very tricky. Then I worked in the luxury grooming market in a startup called Homage. I named the company. I designed everything for them. We'll get to that later. On the left, there's a luxury razor that sold for $20,000. Now, you would be totally right to say, Wolfgang, is that what mankind needs? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Why did we do that? Because it was a little startup, so we had no marketing budget. You know, you can't put an ad in the New York Times or so. When you say you make the most expensive razor in the world, you get a little article in Newsweek for free. So that was the idea behind. We didn't make the price. That was our PR agency that said, oh, it should be 20,000, okay? It did cost us 1,000 to just find one of the 3 human beings on planet Earth that makes Damascene steel razor blades. One is in Japan, one in America, and one in Germany. We went to the German guy, a retired guy, and said, oh, I like to only do these things that I have fun with. We bought the blade, and we made that straight edge razor. I didn't shave with that one, by the way. It has a platinum sheath, so very nice mechanism, all this luxury and high end. On the right, that was the flagship product of the company. That's using this badger hair, a very traditional way of shaving, you know, with soap. And it's magnetically suspended on the stand, and on the back side there is a razor attached that uses Gillette Mach 3 blades. That was a startup that tried to do the same thing for women's razor. That did not take off. So startups, 1 out of 5 is only successful. I've done already 5, you know, or been involved in 5. So I think it's my time now. So I have to start a new startup, I think. That's an interesting project for a German traditional company, Junghans. They made clocks and watches since more than 100 years. And there was a technology which today is totally common. At the time it was not unheard of, but there was no product on the market with it. So if you wanted a clock that receives a time signal from one of the stations that emits them, in German it is in Frankfurt, it's very precise. It's 1 second wrong in a million years, and even Germans consider that sufficiently precise. So you have that receiving device, and you get the signal, and you have a clock that shows the time. But this company put that on a chip, and so they could mass produce a product, and they asked Frog Design to design it, and in Frog Design I designed this clock here. So in other words, it's always good when you have a client that has innovation, and then you can do something. Let me go back. Then you can, with your design, react to that innovation. You want stuff to be new. You don't want to have another clock on the market. Nobody's asked for that. Nobody needs that. You will not be very successful with that, particularly if you don't have a brand that's already known. The brand here was known. If you see the clock face is slightly curved. It was to symbolize like a parabolic antenna that receives a signal. That's what I try to do. There's a little fun fact. You see the hourly indicators, they are these green dots, and I was really fighting for these green dots. So they are injection molded on a ring, so they stick out. And we designers, we don't really know a lot about color. I think our education, and I don't want to talk about Cal State Long Beach, but I didn't get a good color education. And we had a good professor, but you're just not training that enough. But at the time, it was a fashionable color in clothes, and I really liked it, and it was a kind of bluish green. And I made these green dots in the screen and explained to the client why absolutely he has to have these dots sticking out, so it's a three-dimensional thing protruding the surface. It's not just printed. Well, after this clock came to the market, there were other companies also buying this clockwork and selling radio-controlled clocks. And many of them used that green color as an indicator of this Funktechnologie, as it's in German, the radio receiving technology. And without knowing, I had created a trend. So that's how it sometimes happened. I was very surprised. This is packaging design. On the left, that is for the largest Korean watch manufacturer, Romanson, with a very subtle hint. When you go in the luxury market or in the watch market, people want to see gold, but at the same time, you want to be a bit subtle about it. Not everybody wants to have everything gold. And so I put this just on the sides there to shine out a little bit. In the middle, there is a product that was even awarded in a New York exhibition for package design. It is for that startup company Homage. We had this line of products we wanted to sell for men, pre-shave, aftershave, and during shaving, shaving foam, shaving gel, shaving oil, all these things that exist. And we had this special formula, special scent, etc. And I wanted to do something different. I wanted something that you could travel with. So this is about this tall and a bit thicker than my thumb. And you can twist it. There's no cap that can get loose. And the aesthetics that I wanted is a little bit like a spark plug almost, like a mechanical, masculine-looking thing. So that's what we did there. And for the same company, I created this series of boxes. And we said, we don't want just a box. These luxury razors, and the razor that I showed you before with a badger, that's about $400 or $500. So it's expensive, but it's considered like a gift in the luxury market. And it's a gift that men also give to themselves, That's what we do, It's very difficult to give somebody a gift that makes his own money in general, because that person can go and buy his or her own stuff, right? So what do you give as a gift? And that's why sometimes people end up buying their own gifts. In any case, you don't want to just have a box. You want to perhaps use that box afterwards. And we had this concept that you could either store watches in. So there was an insert you could order that you can put a watch collection in, or jewelry in general. You can give it for your own jewelry or for your partner's jewelry or whatever. And there was one with a humidor with a hygrometer that you can store your cigars in. It was a really nice box. I wish I would have more than just the one or two that I have. So this is interface design. They just happen to be the same proportions in screens, but they have different sizes. On the left is the interface for the remote control of the airplane. So you have all these presets that you have to do. In the middle is the pupillometer. It's very important to design that in a way that in an ER situation, when people are really fighting for somebody's life, there is no fancy graphics. Something that is not crystal clear will never fly. You have to be absolutely clear with the colors. If you use colors, colors have to be supported by something else, like a traffic light. We know that the red light is on top, the green light is at the bottom. At the same time, you cannot just rely on the colors. These colors are carefully selected so people, 5% of men are partially colorblind. There are different types of colorblindness. So I checked that even for colorblind people, there's still a differentiation in the gray level of these colors. And on the right, there's a bit more of a difficult interface, and I'll go to that in detail. So we were asked by a company. When I say we, it's not the royal we. I have a business partner in Switzerland, and we worked on that project together. We were asked to design an interface for a company that sits in Liechtenstein. You may not know, Liechtenstein is its own country. It's actually very small. It's like a side valley of Switzerland. In that country sits a company called Inficon, and they own companies in Sweden and Germany and Singapore and Syracuse, New York. They even have a dude here in Irvine. So they are worldwide, and there's one guy traveling around buying companies. And they said, we want that all products we have a unified interface. That was a really nice project. They invited us, paid for that. You come for 1 week, you just learn about the problem. Just for 1 week, you both come here and we show you all the products we have and what the problem is and what we can do about that. And then you go and design something that can be applied to all those products. And we did something that was so innovative that it was patentable. Whenever you have an interface, you usually have a menu tree. You have home, where you start out, whether it's an app or a website, and then you go from there. You go in different directions. And one problem is if you've ended up in one direction, you want to avoid having to go all back if you want to go in another direction. So how can you achieve that? And by analyzing all their products, going through the instruction manuals, etc., we realized that from home, you could create 4 subdivisions that every of their product has. So they have leak detection devices and mass spectrometers, gas chromatographs, laboratory devices that steer production. Very interesting set of technical gadgetry. And we said, whatever you do, even when you buy a car today, you have settings. You have to tell the car that it should be blue light instead of green or red. Things that nobody 50 years had to think about. There wasn't no light in the car. There was one little light bulb. But today you have these LED things. In any case, you have to do settings with every product. You have to tell the product to calibrate it, to set it. Then there's operation. In this case, it was mostly observational, which is why it's symbolized with an eye. And then one thing is also sure, there's always something that goes wrong. You need a maintenance button, something alert, warning, where you can go and find out what went wrong. And then there's a 4th thing that's for information, logs, instruction manuals, what have you. So in the discussion with the client, one of the marketing guys said, yeah, those are people selling these products, and they want to have their back free. They always want to have the latest and greatest and want to be able to be flexibly reacting to new demands. They said, what happens if we have a 5th? And we were mean, we said, then we get a screen that has 5 corners. But that was just a joke, of course. Now, we said, what do you think would not fit in any of these 4 categories? And they couldn't answer that. They couldn't imagine something that is neither to do with settings nor with the actual operation, nor when it goes wrong or the log. So we really won all those people over with the idea of having it in the four corners, and we invented this, what we call diagonal swiping, because, you know, we swipe on devices, but you could swipe diagonally, and nobody had thought about that, which surprised me, but that's why they could patent it. Okay. Once you design interface like that, in this case for this company, the guy traveling around buying up companies, some companies want to keep their brand image. So they have different colors. They want the same mechanics, I would almost say, the same logic behind, but the skin has to be different. So this is an example how we did that for one of their sub-brands. We developed a skin that works on the same surface. Of course, that does not have the diagonal swiping. That's reserved for their own brand. But the other points and switches are more or less in this, if not in the same position, they are in the same presence. And then you have to spec that. You have to specify, and this is just to, you know, show off how meticulous we are in the specification of each line width, each what button, where, what is the rollover color, etc., etc., etc. So it gets very detailed like that. I like to do this work. It's not necessarily as creative as finding a new shape for a new device, but it's very nice. It's very disciplined, you know. My German side can become active there. Together with that, there's a lot of iconography to be done, you know. So in my life, I don't know, when I was a student, I bought this book about 3,000 pictograms, and I realized it's a world out there that some people don't even know about. There are pictograms for suicide by gassing, shooting, and hanging yourself for statistical purposes. There are pictograms for everything. Pictograms have disadvantages. Some of them you have to learn. They are not intuitively understandable. And they have advantages. So instead of a long word, if you manage to get that in a square little box, you're saving a lot of valuable space in a car on the dashboard, you know, where it may get crowded, or in an interface where it also might get very crowded. Now, not all of these I designed. I did not design the X, you know. I designed it to go in the line with the font that we've chosen, of course, you know. And then you have to do them in different colors that they appear. And so it takes about, a pictogram on average takes about half a day to get into the system. Even if it's a simple one, it doesn't take 10 minutes. I mean, the X, you can say, oh, let's do an X. Yeah, and then you say how, why, what's the proportion with the line width and so on. Then you have to do the colors, then you have to feed it. So that goes faster. It doesn't take 4 hours. But some others take a lot longer. Those are the ones that are more complicated, you know. When a crystal is broken, here, when that's, what do you call it, a filament, filament is heating, and that was an opener that was like iris-shaped. That's just to tell you about little nitty-gritty detail you have to get into. I said I do graphic design. As a student, I earned my living in a advertising agency, and several advertising agencies, and I learned a lot there about fonts, typography, etc. I'm not particularly good in layout, so there are so many specializations. Have I ever designed poster other than for private purposes? No. That book cover you saw, that was just for a friend out of fun, because I wanted to see, you know. He couldn't really complain if I do it for free, right? And one thing I like to do, and I hope I'm good at, is logos, you know. So here are some logos. The first one, top left, is for a music school, and their tagline was "The music in you." And I thought, oh, that's funny. We put the little note in the U, and yeah. Then on the top right is for a startup of men's grooming products, Men of Earth, and so I did this like the globe with a 24-degree axis, like Earth, planet Earth has a 24 degrees inclination approximately of the axis. The bottom left, I'm proud because the name, when you look at the letters N-A-P, you don't think that you can make the letter A, P, G, and E look the same, but they do here. So that surprised me myself. And on the bottom right is a little monogram for fashion designer in Paris. Corporate design, corporate design is when you do not only the logo, but you know the whole appearance of a brand on the market. And I've done that for this Korean watch company. It was interesting in that exchange that I participated in. I was planted in the company, and after working there for a month, they said, we want you to design our corporate design. We want you to redesign our logo. We want to be more international. It's a whole project, interesting to talk about on its own, but I'll keep that brief for tonight. Then Homage, the men's grooming company, and the women's grooming company, Divador. In the case of Homage, I read that the logo and the graphic, I came up with the name, which is interesting because it was a French-based company run by an American started in the American market, because that's easier for startup companies. And he wanted to have the French touch in there, which in the cosmetic sector is very good. It's very important, you know. Parfum and everything there is French, you know. So after coming up with this homage, that's what it means, I designed the logo, I did the graphics, I did packaging, product design, website, everything, shop in shop, everything you can imagine all around it. Good, so that's about me and my work. You know a little bit about what I'm doing, or to be more precise, what I have done. And now I'm going to talk about functionalism. Where does it come from? And you will be probably as surprised as I was when I realized the roots of functionalism are actually not only in France, they are in Paris. This is our wonderful Church of Notre Dame. I'm not religious, but to me that church is very important. It sits on one of the islands, there are two islands, or two main islands in the Seine River in the center of the city, which is where Paris originated. It was a fisherman's village long time ago. All that is wonderfully described in the book from Victor Hugo, Notre Dame de Paris, and it is the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, which you may know from Disney movies. Oh. Good. Notre Dame, as you may know, has burned down almost, or the roof has burned away, and also that spire in the middle burned away. Now they have built it back up again. This was a photo taken pre-reconstruction. Anyway, that spire, the church is from 11-something, and it took 100 years to build. So when about half a year ago, so it opened, I went in, tried to be one of the first ones. It was a year ago that it opened. And it was a stunning experience. Because when that church opened the first time, it was already 100 years old. Now you can imagine what a 100 years old church before the Middle Ages looked like. It was probably already dusty and musty when it opened the first day. But here it opened a year ago, and everything in there was brand new and super old at the same time. It was like a time machine. It was really a fantastic experience. They have few new elements like the furniture and some welcoming center, simple round tables, and they're beautifully chosen. And all the rest is reconstructed or redone or retouched by specialized artisans. It's just, the atmosphere is amazing. It was never as clear and clean and bright as today because the windows, they were sooty from hundreds of years. I mean, imagine 1100 something, 1,000 years of dust almost on there. And now they're all clear. If you go during the daytime, it's a beautiful image. Anyway, talking about that spire in the middle, because that wasn't there originally. That came later. And then it fell apart. And then it was rebuilt by Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. Why is that of any importance? Because that man is the godfather of functionalism. And you can see that by his quote. He said, "A rationally designed structure may not necessarily be beautiful, but no building can be beautiful that does not have rationality designed structure." So it's the first guy that really, he was a philosopher and architect. As a very young man, he was charged by reconstructing an abbey that was falling apart in Vézelay. And when he was, that brought him so much success that they asked him to help also reconstruct Notre Dame. Because in the revolution, things happened. Lots of things happened. People chopped heads off, not only of people, but also of statues on the facade of Notre Dame. They destroyed masks. They didn't take care of that spire that fell apart. And Viollet-le-Duc brought the spire back up. And now they decided, after it burned, to also put it back up. But what's important about him is that he said, wait a minute, this is not just, I'm not just doing something pretty here. There has to be a rationality behind it. And that inspired many people to think that what we do as designers or architects, and in that regard it's really the same, has to have a reason, a rationality or a functionality. And he influenced three people, among many others, Hector Guimard, Antoni Gaudi, and Otto Wagner. Does anybody here know any of the three? Yes. The middle one? Okay, Gaudi. I make it easy for you. This Hector Guimard, and I didn't really know that a long time before I moved to Paris, is the guy that did this Art Nouveau type of metropolitan, the metro, our subway system, entrances and details. He was an architect that had these flowery shapes. So that's Hector Guimard. In Paris, if you live in Paris, you should know that. Antoni Gaudi designed that church that is still under construction. And it's going to be ready soon. And some people in Barcelona are really worried because they're used to it not being ready. You know, it's a fantastic building. It's not my style, how I design. It's not that I want to live in a house that's like that, but you have to go there. It's impressive. And then the least known of the three of them is Otto Wagner. That was an architect here in Vienna. He did the postal bank with a glass roof and a glass bottom, so underneath you still daylight in. Beautiful details, everything very organized, but also very functional. And now I'm talking about proponents, because these three people that you've seen, and also Viollet-le-Duc, the style of the construction is not what we would consider functionalism today. We expect something a lot more sober, maybe minimalist looking or more technical looking. And that's what these people here did. Because Eugène Viollet-le-Duc also influenced these three architects, and you're supposed to know them, because Frank Lloyd Wright is American. Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Le Corbusier had big successes in America with buildings. And just in case you don't, here are three of them. And if you look at the structure, that looks incredibly modern, although they're very old, you know. That is really something that I find inspirational, that they were so forward-looking, particularly Frank Lloyd Wright, who went through different phases in his career as an architect. And that was like the end phase where he had really matured to something that still today looks very modern. And if you listen to what they say, you see that they were influenced and brought that idea of functionalism further. So form and function should be one, joined in a spiritual union. So there's somebody who says, well, if we design something, the function has to be a part of that. The form and the function is one thing. And then Ludwig Mies van der Rohe didn't mince words, very briefly, less is more. You can endlessly debate about that, because the shorter sentences, the more you can interpret it in different ways, and you can criticize, and I'll go through some of that. But look at his building. That's the new National Gallery in Berlin, my favorite museum. It looks like there's this suspended roof, and underneath there's just big space with glass around. That is really less and is more. It's a super impressive building if you're standing in front of it. That roof can't be overlooked. The museum is fully there and at the same time almost like floating. And then Le Corbusier, who said, create architecture is to put things in order. You know, when people invite me for dinner, sometimes I'm taking the knife and the fork and I arrange them, because they're not perfectly aligned and I must have some mental deficiency or super capacity that this bugs me. And so putting things in order, I always thought it was a deficiency, and I realized that's wonderful for my profession. Putting things in order is a part of what we do as designers. And then, of course, there's Louis Sullivan. Louis Sullivan coined form follows function. And even if you don't believe that, or you don't want to put that on your T-shirt, your clients will, oh, you're a designer, form follows function, right? That's the one thing they have heard about designs, form follows function. What I would criticize about it, it suggests an automatism. Form doesn't follow anything. It sounds like, oh, yeah, you're a designer, so we have the function and the form just follows it. And no, that's not how it works, you know. We're not just putting a nice form on the function that follows, you know. It has to be, and there I'm more in line with Frank Lloyd Wright, it has to be integrated, you know. There has to be a play between the form and the function. There has to be an expression of the function through the form that doesn't suggest a simple following, you know. This is the prudential building that Sullivan designed. It doesn't look super modernist to us today, but when you see where that functionalism idea comes from in the modern times, it's also because when, for instance, the first steam engines were constructed, there was an engineer, does a drawing for the whole machine, defines all the parts, an incredibly hard work and with a lot of responsibility for the fact that this thing works afterwards. And then the final thing, he makes it a little bit nice, you know. So some of these first steam engines, they have columns. They look like Greek columns on a Greek temple. It has nothing to do with nothing, but hey, it's just kind of pretty, right? That was probably their thinking. So to go away from that, because this building, as old as it may look to us today, does not have any classical architectural elements. That made it special. It does not have the levity of Mies van der Rohe's roof and the clear and the glass and so on. They were not quite there yet, but there's a certain honesty. You see which material is used where. You see the verticality emphasized. So there's a lot of thinking that went into the architecture, as it always does, that it functions, but they try to use the architecture also to express that. Okay, modern times, Dieter Rams, still alive, 93, a designer. We can call him the governor of design. It's just almost slightly more insulting in Germany because it alludes a little bit to the fact that some of the Braun design that Dieter Rams did is based on design that Hans Gügelow, another designer, did before him. A gentleman had passed away at a fairly young age. But he is responsible for Braun design in his heydays, and I think he did a great job. If I would criticize, because one of his credos or his beliefs is that he said, you know, again, less is more, least design possible is the best. Look at that. There's a little red arrow pointing at the date window. That's not as little as possible because you don't need a red arrow there, right? So it's not as minimalist as it can be. It would be more minimalist without the arrow because people know that that's the date, right? So also he says, oh, there's only one way to design. No, there's apparently, as I can see from your two watches, there's, you even yourself believe that there are two. So sometimes the strictness that he postulated isn't kept up with his actual work. But to show you how hard he worked and how far and revolutionary he was, I show you one of his first designs, and that's the radio on the right. On the left, that was just released a year previously, is a radio like my parents had that type of radio. Look at that radio. And what does it do? It pretends to be something. It pretends to be a piece of furniture. You know, it has a lot of wood there, to show that, oh yeah, I'm belonging here into the living room. You never had a radio here before. I'm the first radio you have. And I'm just like another piece of furniture that you have to have. You never ask why you need a table and a chair. So don't ask why you need a radio. Then, the buttons, they look like ivory. They are faux ivory. They're plastic. But they're not in a plastic color. They are specifically in a color that looks like maybe a piano keys, you know. They pretend to be more. There's a lot of gold. None of that, of course, is gold. That's all, you know, brass. And then there's this almost, I mean, this is okay-ish, that loudspeaker cover, but some really look like hand crocheted. It's like artisanal something. It doesn't speak technology because people were perhaps still alienated, or the manufacturer of this was afraid that people would be alienated by too modern a design. And that is where Dieter Rams comes in. And he made the center part in metal. And okay, he's nice, so he paints it. But he paints it in a fiery gray, as they called it, you know, something wild gray. Huh? And then he puts a plastic, very modern, clear plastic on the top, which is why this is referred to as Snow White's coffin, this product. It's actually the Braun SK4. And on the sides, they were talked into still showing some wood so people are not too shocked. You know, they're still supposed to go in the living room, and you can never ignore the visual environment of what you design for. But it shows how brave it was. The buttons there, they're not ivory, they're gray. They're plastic, honest plastic gray. And that's one of the reasons, I think, why he was so inspirational. And even Joni Ive admitted that he was inspired by Dieter Rams' design. You see two different products. On the left is a radio, and here also an object that gives you music, but it's not a radio, it's an iPod. Not sure whether you still know what that is. And on the right you see a pocket calculator and the equivalent of the interface on the Apple iPhone, on the first Apple iPhone. So he admitted, no, I wanted it to look like that because I think that's like the pinnacle of good design. This is what I believe in. That is functionalism. Dieter Rams postulated 10 principles of good design, and I want to read them out and go through one by one, and I need my glasses for that. So the first he said that design has to be innovative, and that it unites design with progressive technology. As I told you, it's always good if you have a client that has modern technology. It's easier to get a design award, by the way. If your client has an innovative product and you're not screwing up completely with the design, you'll get a design award, just because of the innovation of the product, which may not be your doing. It should be useful. And I agree, products has to fulfill a clear purpose. You don't want a useless product. Now, if you have a design office and you make a living on that, and somebody says, oh, I have a useless product here, can you design it for me? Nobody says that. But you may think, maybe it's useless. But then it's your job to make it useful. And often you can do that. I love that he uses beauty. Beauty is very important to me. One reason is that nobody pays you for that. People say, oh yeah, we want to make it beautiful, but who measures that? According to what standards? And that is how expensive exactly? Everybody wants his product to be beautiful, but they don't even know how to ask for that, But beauty is important in life in general. There's a good quote coming up later. So he says it's an important part of usability. Then the product has to be understandable. We agree. Nobody reads instruction manuals, particularly not my girlfriend. She admits that. And she says, I only do that for professional reasons, Sometimes instruction manuals can be more expensive than the product, particularly in Europe, where it has to be translated in at least 11 languages, what have you. So you want a product that doesn't need an instruction manual. It has to be understandable. And he says it has to be unobtrusive. That's a functionalist point of view. Unobtrusive. Hang back, so leave space for the user. The idea behind it is very humane. It says products are just products. What's important in life are human beings, so products should stand back. In principle, I agree. If you look at how I live in my apartment, yes, I think important are my friends or family coming and being there. It's not the objects. But there are some objects, I like them to have a personality. But maybe I'm not a functionalist. Interesting is the term of honesty. And when you saw the radio, that's why I showed you the radio. It's not honest to have faux ivory. It's not honest to have all this gold that's really just brass. All these things are dishonest. And he blasts his current situation, 1957, for it. He postulated these points later, but that's where he worked exactly according to these rules when he started working. He said it should be durable. Avoid being fashionable. That's another thing, and timelessness, but I'm going to comment that later on. And it should be meticulously detailed. That's something I agree on. The devil is in the detail, but also the angel is in the detail. A product that you want a product that is good designed, you have to make sure all details are nice too. You can't. A bad detail can take every product down, so you can't compromise on that. And it has to be environmental friendly, and he is really trailblazing with that too. We can all agree on that. It should conserve resources and minimize pollution. The 10th point, I'm not so happy. I'll tell you why. He says design. Good design, the principle is good design as little design as possible. I think that's circular. So first you say, All that is good design, and then you say good design is as little design as possible. You mean as little of that as, that's not what you mean, right? I don't think he does. So I think that's a logical somersault he's doing there, and I'm not in agreement, but I tell you in detail. So design can be innovative on its own too. So it's not only that design is reflecting an innovation on the technical side. You can have a new design something the way how it's never been designed before. Also, sometimes it's difficult to separate the function from the design. You know, it's not always clear. For instance, putting these 4 corners on the interface, that's innovative design, right? But it's also an innovative functionality. The product can fulfill more than one purpose, is what I would criticize. And I would say, yeah, beauty makes a product more fun to use. That's, you want beauty because it makes people positive about it. Not only that they shell out the money, but they have fun and enjoy using it. I hope you have some products that you enjoy using as much as I do with some. I think a design has to be expressive and understandable. He says it should be understandable. And I say, yeah, but the ultimate understandability is expressiveness. And that's not minimalist. You know, Dieter Rams is a minimalist. He wants as little design as possible. And I say, yeah, no, sometimes you want to really show the design. I mean, take a Dyson, you know, you see where things go, and there's a big yellow button or red button for this and that. So that's like perhaps overly expressive, I admit that, but it's kind of a counterpoint to Dieter Rams. For him, minimalism, of course, is king. About honesty, in general, I think honesty is vastly underrated, particularly in these times. And I'm not going to go into details on a political scale, but I think honesty is a value. And however, it's difficult when you talk about honesty in design. I bought a Baron Olufsen device many, many years ago, and I wanted the white version, which is the white version, and there was a wooden version. I said, oh, is that real wood? He said, yep. 0.8 millimeter real wood veneer. So is that honest? You tell me, you know. Then when I was working on alarm clocks, I got some samples for plastic that was chrome plated. And according to people like Dieter Rams and these functionalists, said, oh, that's not honest. It pretends to be metal, it's just plastic, okay? Yeah, but you know, I have a Hans Grohe shower unit in my bathroom. And there's a handle, it's chrome, it's brass, chrome-plated. And there's this round thing that covers it to the wall, and that is plastic, and it's chrome-plated. And it's an excellent quality of chrome plating, so after 20 years, there's no scratch on it. So it's really thick, heavy-duty chrome plating. So it improves the quality of the plastic underneath. And I think that is perfectly justified. I don't want to see plastic there. It would perhaps be too soft. I don't use scratchy stuff on it, but after 20 years it would still be showing marks, but the chrome protects it. So I'm for honesty, but it's difficult to say what is materially honest in design. When Rams talks about durability and timelessness, the one problem I have with it that when you look at his design, and again we'll talk about it later too, it was referred to as timeless design, but today you can say this was designed by Rams in 1965 and that was designed in 1975. Up to the decade precision you can say when his timeless design was designed. So if it's not possible, is it even worth attempting timelessness? Also, why should we ignore something as important as time? Why shouldn't we today design something for today or tomorrow rather than for timelessness? And what is that even? That's my criticism. Meticulously detailed, I fully agree with him. I think everything has to be continuous, you know. When you have a detail, it should correspond to the overall. You don't want to mix styles in one product, except that's your intention and you have a good reason for that, which could be the case. And about environmental friendliness, I can just fully agree and say it's very complex, but he's right there. Well, and that I told you already what I think about the last thing. It's we want much, not little design. We want much of that good design that he postulated there. So that's functionalism for you, not in a nutshell, but in a 10-point program. And now I show you some critics. They are not necessarily outspoken critics. I'm not aware that all or each one of them has come out and said, I'm against functionalism. But you just look at those people's work and you decide for yourself whether you think that is good design or not. Believe me, I've chosen it because I think it's good design. And then you tell me whether you think they have as much right to do their design non-functional as Rams has to do it functional. First protagonist is an American, Raymond Louis, French-born. That's where the name comes from, probably. And he said, between two products equal in price, function, quality, the better looking will outsell the other. What I like, it's very Raymond Louis. So he doesn't talk about beauty or the soul or what the people want. He's just saying, it sells better, you know, very American point of view. Mercantile, honest, sticking with that, you know. We want to sell. We sell more when it's beautiful. And that has nothing to do with the function, okay? Why does a pencil sharpener have to be freaking aerodynamic? I don't know, you know, but hey, looks cool, even today. So that's what I like about it. I'll show you some more products just for the fun of it. You know, there's this locomotive, the shell. He did delivery for the Air Force One, in case you are not aware. So it's still painted in that way. There's a Coca-Cola, they say it's a boat motor Coca-Cola dispenser because it looks like an outboard engine. I don't know why. On the right, very interesting radio. That was fairly late. That was in the 70s. My parents had that, and I had no idea that was designed by Raymond Louis. So on the top you see the loudspeaker. That was the mono. There was also a stereo version. And these two acrylic flaps, and when you switched the radio on and closed them, the light would shine through. It was really magical. And you could open it up, and underneath you see all the necessary interface, but nice typography and beautiful colors. And the colors, yeah, they help to distinguish the different bandwidths of the radio station, but they add this type of joy that functionalists don't want to give you. You know, I'm harsh here. They are not bad people, but yeah, they are very, very thrifty with the visual clues about what's fun in life. Next, American. That was by happenstance. I didn't say, oh, let me use as many Americans. It's just that came up. Charles Eames, very important designer. He said, who ever said that pleasure wasn't functional, you know? So he talks about pleasure. It's not only functional, pleasure, you know, just the fun of sitting on this beautiful chair. A little bit backstory, in the Second World War, he was in the army, and he realized when somebody breaks his leg in the field, they need to put a cast on him and then ship him back, and it's very difficult because these casts were heavy. So he designed and developed, invented a cast and patterned it, made of layered wood, veneers pressed together in a certain shape that allowed not only to put the leg in, but it was also reusable. So you could, with straps, affix that, and so reuse it and made the transport of wounded people from the front easier. He designed lots of chairs with the technology, and then he said, oh, let's do a high-end version where we take really luxury wood on the outside, so this is probably palisander, and we put leather inside. I think it's a very nice and successful product. He did not only chairs, he did also games and what have you, but his chairs are really fantastic. And this was influenced by the sculptor Henry Moore, who did sculptures that had these holes in there. If you look up Henry Moore, you'll see that. There's always modern technology involved, glass fiber reinforced, plastic injection, leather, and aluminium for the famous chair on the right, which still looks very modern today. You look at television interviews, often you see the news speaker sitting on a chair like that because it projects modernity and reliability and seriousness in a nice way. Oops, sorry, that went too fast. That is Achille Castiglione. I met him when he was already over 90 years old, and he was a fun guy. He lived in this palazzo in Milan, and he says, one of my secrets is to joke all the time. That's to tell you that design is about doing something reliably, professionally, in a planned way, but at the same time, there are aspects that can hardly be quantified. And they are important for your own life as a designer, because he had fun, believe me, and also for the people using their products. So one of his early products was this, which is interesting. It's made from, there's a yoke, you know, from oxen pulling a cart. there's a tractor seat from a farm, and the only thing he designed was this metal bar in between, and then he used a screw to fix that. And that's a chair. And so he had this playfulness that is inimitable and really remarkable. One of my favorite lamps. What is so amazing about this lamp? Look at this. Up to here, it's a total normal lamp. You have a cable, you have a fitting where you can screw in the bulb, that's the lamp, and there's a shade. And he added, this name of this lamp is Frisbee, he added a disc with a hole. And like that, he created 3 types of light. There's a direct light, there's a reflected light, and since that disc is translucent, there's also diffusing light. With one simple thing, easy to manufacture, he created this beautiful lamp that is just amazing, and it's so stunning, it's so surprising. And to have an idea that anybody could have had dozens of years before, but nobody had it. Radio system, to show you also the difference to the radio from Rams. Then on the right, parentesi means bracket, and this is a very simple lamp. There's a cable, you suspend it from the ceiling and you put a weight at the bottom, it all comes in the package, and then you have this tube that has a bend, which prevents it from sliding up and down on its own. And that's affixed to a lamp holder, and now you can slide it up and it'll stay wherever you need it. The product Achille Castiglione was most proud of is the one here in the center. Hardly visible, sorry, but it's white on white. It's a light switch. Why was he so proud of it? Because he said that's in every Italian household, and not only Italian, it's way over Europe. I had that too. He designed the switch that goes between the cables to switch a lamp. So I like that he realized that he'd done really something important. Wish he got royalties on that. I love the quote from this man, Ettore Sottsass. It's not necessarily my favorite designer or that I love his stuff best. He's very important, and a lot of stuff he did I respect, but this quote, in the end, only beauty will save us. What distinguishes us from an animal? We create things, but to create beautiful things, that's really a human prerogative. These are some products he did. Famous, a typewriter is before computers. You know, had things you put in paper and they punched away, and that came in a drawer, so you could carry it with you. And they had photos of people sitting in the park on a typewriter. Not sure how realistic that is, but they said, it's not only an office equipment. Maybe I write a love letter on that. Maybe I write a book on it. So it's, before, typewriters looked like professional instruments. And he gave the fun back. You can also see from the colors, it was in the years when plastics were able to be manufactured with color pigments that were stable. That's why they had all this red and orange and yellow. In the middle, top middle, is an Olivetti calculator that is all encased in rubber. So you could take it, you know, on a construction site and you can make a calculation. And the buttons are all integrated in the skin. So that was pretty innovative. On the right, not very visible, I'm afraid. Can you see that? It's actually okay. It's just from my side. That's a mirror. It's just a mirror with an illumination. It's called Super Strawberry, Super Fragole, for no reason whatsoever. I'm not sure what they were smoking at the time, but you know, they did crazy stuff also. Not functionist, okay? That's the whole point of showing you these. At the same time, he did an office chair. But again, that office chair doesn't look like an office chair that Dieter Rams designed, you know? There's color in there. There are shapes, bold. There's a phone. He also did a lot of sculptures. And on the bottom right, you may think, that looks weird, what is that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the world's first personal computer by Olivetti, designed by Sottsass. Oh, I just realized that's a mistake. That was not designed by him, that was designed by Bellini. I gotta change that. Pardon. Let's go, move on. My former boss, it's not that I feel obliged to have him in there, but he's not only an interesting man, but he is really a cool designer and rightfully famous. In a time where IBM computers look gray and boring, today you may laugh about it because you say, wow, that is great. No. They were ugly, boring gray. They had this line of products that they called Snow White. It was a light pigment. It was critical to get it, to prevent it from yellowing out. It was not easy to manage in the manufacturing. But he said, I want the computer to look more like a fun thing than a business thing. And if you think that's just a small step in the direction, compare it, for example, to the first iMac. You are right. But in those days, when that was designed in 1983, that was pretty revolutionary. There are some more things. Sony Walkman, Next Computer, and here, just for fun, something that was never built. It was a design study for Apple, what a laptop could look like. You see there is this pink handle frame, and then there's a huge yellow hard drive, you know. At the time they were huge. They were not yellow though. And then there's a screen, and that was super top modern technology, soon gonna come type of thing, and a keyboard. And with these colors he showed that's really what he wanted to do, but you know, with the studies you can always go a little bit further ahead than with the actual production you sell. There's, on the top right, you see an answering machine, which was a little box. You know, you could come home and you could immediately see whether somebody left a message. It was very nice interface, very expressive design, you know. It's not a good photo because it doesn't show everything. You know, it doesn't show the bass, etc. But you can see the little loudspeaker bulging out there. That's expressive, you know. Where the functionists would say, oh, we make a little perforation, some slots. The expressionists say, oh, there's a loudspeaker, sound comes out, let's show that, okay? And I'm all for it. And that TV set with an interesting perforation on the right. So, this is Gaetano Pesce, not very well known, but should be. He said, I strive to seek new material that fit into the logic of construction while performing service appropriate to real needs. So he's talking about real needs. He sees that function is function, but humans have real needs. And the real need is not only to get your lemon pressed, or to your calculation calculated, or a surface high enough to sit on. No, this is made of felt, of thick felt. And from here on to the bottom, it's soaked in resin. So it looks like felt, it feels like felt, but it's completely stiff. If you knock against it, it makes that sound. The top part, however, is flexible. This is not soaked in resin. So you can sit in a chair and you can really close it up and cocoon and cuddle with yourself. And I think that's a real need people may have. And the functionalists, they don't know what you're talking about. You know, what do you mean, a chair I can cuddle myself? What? You know, that's really important that you understand needs go way beyond the function, the technical function of a product. Here's some more stuff he did. That got him into political trouble. He then interpreted this, okay, that is the modern woman. The woman is the most important thing in the world, and she is held back here by this weight, which represents the masculine. Okay, he tried to get away with a chair with boobs, I guess, you know. And then the colors and the materials he's used, all very expressive, you know. And still stuff that you can use, so it's not that it doesn't have any function. Philip Stark, I like to show that because I always say that's a great example for non-functionalists. He doesn't say it doesn't work. He said, my juice is not meant to squeeze lemons. It's there as a conversation starter. Okay? And I say even it works because it made Philip Stark famous. It made Alessi a bit richer. And it makes you look cool when you give it as a present or you have it on the board and people come and say, oh, wow, you design that, right? So there's more than just the function of pressing lemon. It does a lousy job, I've heard. I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't attempt. Philip Stark does good stuff, though. And this chair, that innocent-looking plastic chair, is an exemplary product. It works super well. I have it at home. You can sit for 3 hours because the ergonomics is right. You're not getting tired. It's made of plastic, so it integrates not only well, it completely disappears. So when you have an old Parisian apartment and maybe some new furniture, this one doesn't conflict, you know. It really blends in nicely. Also, they have a child version, you know, and I gave that to every one of my 3 godsons and my daughter and my girlfriend's niece, and to every kid that I can get hold of, because it's just so small and they can't hurt themselves really. They can lift it up, carry it around, put it somewhere, sit down. They are so happy that they have their own chair, and it's a safe product. So it's not easy to do. Okay, and various other ones. I just learned that today that he did a wall, how do you say, for electric cars for Bentley. It looks cool, but small target group, I guess. Alessandro Mendini says, I treat objects as if they were human beings. I make them smile. So it's obviously a designer that doesn't want to get into the functionalism thing. He doesn't even want to discuss or argue. So he said, I don't make the users of my products smile. I make my products smile, you know. And he named it Anna G after a female friend of his, you know. He did a lot of crazy other stuff, but he's into this playfulness, and why not? He has this completely non-functional approach, and it's hard to imagine how he would design a computer. And there are sometimes reasons why these kind of designers don't get a job to design a computer. But among the critics of functionalism, I've shown you, Esslinger, for instance, does computer. A computer doesn't have to be functionalist design. Dyson is, for me, is a fascinating man. He's my age, he's just hugely successful. He designed this first vacuum cleaner without the bag, and it was tedious, and to get there he made, I think, 2,000 prototypes, and he tried to sell it to companies, and they said, oh, you're crazy, it'll never work, until he decided to start his own company, and that's what he did, and he became successful. Now, he says, he doesn't talk a lot about functionality. All his quotes, most of his quotes are a reflection of his personal struggles to be successful. So he say, oh, never give up. It's all about that. It's not about design. I don't criticize that. That's obviously something that has moved that man and shaped this man. But he does say beauty can come in strange forms, and I like it because, of course, he's right, you know. And when you look at his work, yeah, it does come in strange form. I mean, this alien zapper there and down here, you know, that's, so what? If you would have shown that when I started as a young designer to my client, I think they would have had a heart attack. You know, they were, conservative doesn't even cut it, you know. They couldn't imagine, they said, okay, you cannot do something too crazy. They were really worried about these things. And here he goes, does it, and sells it. This is one of my former students. I'm very proud, so I'm tooting not my own horn because he's his own man. So I don't even want to say I contributed to his success. I passed his career during his career. He says consumer want products that tell stories, have magic, and inspire. So yeah, again, that's not a function, you know, or it's a psychological function. You inspire somebody. And he does beautiful things. Computers for kids, office chairs, electronic stuff, shoes, all kinds of things. And there's Karim Rashid. The order of these designers is by when they designed the relevant project that I showed together with the image. He says design is about the betterment of our lives. And he says poetically, you know, poetry, art is in there. Design is not only about function. It will never be only about function because engineers are so much better in doing function than we are. That's their job. We want to do aesthetically, experimentally, sensorily, and emotionally stimulate the users of our products. And Karim Rashid does it with a lot of color, you know, with a lot of funky shapes. The center middle chair there, it looks like it could be a fruit bowl in a different size, you know. It's just stunning what he does. So when you ask me, concludes the functionalism part. Now, Wolfgang, so do you want us to be functionalist or not? And I say, well, I'll show you why I don't want you to be functionalist. What influences or should influence design? I hope we can agree it's, first of all, it should be the user, you know? Who is going to be confronted with your product, with the result of your work? That's the user. That's the most important. That's more important than the technical function, I think. Then there's today ecology. You know, you have to worry about what happens before your product is produced, when it's used, and afterwards. You know, can it be recycled? Is it recyclable? And then the aesthetics, they influence the design. You know, let's not pretend that form follows function automatically. No, you have to make a decision. What shape do I give? Then there's an economic function. That's super important. Why do you design anything? Because somebody gives you money. Why can that person give you the money? Because they want to make more money with that. That's the economic function of a design. And if you ignore that, you're not getting anywhere. There are legal influences and there are historical influences. Going into the details, There's a social function, a human function, and a psychological function. Social function is, does the product reassure me? You know, does it help in my self-esteem and my self-understanding? Does it support my customs and habits? If all of a sudden your product forces somebody to change the habits, good luck with that one. People can be very conservative. The human function is ergonomics. It has to be adjusted to whoever is using it in a physical way and also in a psychological way that's understandable. And then there are certain expectations that users have. They will always have expectations. That can pretty much go on your nerve as a designer, because when you have all coffee machines look like that and you come up with something new, they say, what's that? First of all, what's that? They cannot identify it because it looks different. Secondly, I don't like that, you know, because I've never seen it before, and you know, I like the one that my grandmother had, you know, in the extreme case. That's something, a battle we have all the time as designers. Now, technical function is not unimportant. I'm not saying that. There's materials, there's technologies, and manufacturing processes. They do influence design, and they should, and you have to know about it. And in ecology, you have these things, the energy consumption, material, and the waste, and you have that in 3 stages: during production, during consumption, and afterwards. That's why there's color separation here. And aesthetic is not just make it pretty, okay? The first thing is, I think, most important, it should be expressive. It should explain what it is, and it should explain what it does and how it does it. Then there could be a style, and that style could be minimalism or not. And then there's an integration. The product is in a visual environment. Say you design a coffee machine that looks great in a design museum, but if you put it in your kitchen, it looks like a foreign object. That can be very negative. And I think that's also where originality comes into play. We want to be original in what we do. When we have a product design, it has to look different, particularly when the function is different. When the first Discman came out, when music was stored on circular silver little things, they looked the same like Walkman, which used cassettes. You don't know all these things? Yes, you do. And for me, there was no reason why that should be like that. You have a completely new technology which allows the thing to be flatter and better in quality. Why does it look the same? No reason. So the economic function is subdivided in the company strategy. Okay, one part of every company strategy that I know is they want to make money. But how do they want to make it? Do they want to make it with quality, with expensive stuff, with mass products? All that is a company strategy question. Then there's marketing questions coming up, and sales environment. That's very important today. How is the product sold? Is there, like in the olden days, somebody who recommends this product or that product and I showed you? No, you walk through aisles if you don't shop online, which is probably even more likely. And in these aisles, there are boxes that have 4-color prints of the design. How good does your design need to be that on the photo, it still gets the message across that you as a designer want to give? That's how it influences you. Also the distribution. IKEA is an excellent example. So there were these dudes that had a furniture shop in Sweden, and they said, well, you know, whenever we lug the furniture around, you know, we hardly fit it into the car. They said, we design the furniture so it's all flat packed. And no matter what IKEA does, they try to get it flat packed. They are the inventors of doing that consistently. It's a distribution question in the end. And then there's the brand image. And the brand image, there's something that's called horizontal continuity. Imagine a car company, say Mercedes. They have a horizontal continuity. It means the S-Class and the E-Class and the C-Class and the A-Class, they all look like Mercedes. They don't, but they did for a while. And you can think, if you would be the head of Mercedes, would you want this to be the case or not? You know, and there are a lot of discussions going on and meetings in that company about that. And the other one is the vertical continuity. To what extent does the new Mercedes have to look like the old one? And my answer to the question is, yeah, you want some resemblance, don't you? Legal, it's just mentioned for completeness here, but today regulations, particularly when you talk medical devices, have a big influence on design. There's stuff you just can't do because it won't pass the regulatory test. And when I talk history, I'm not only talking about ancient history, what did a radio used to look like before, Because, you know, we have this thing, we want to do something innovative and new. At the same time, you should still be able to see that it's a radio, shouldn't you? Or to what extent? But there are also things like patents. Some things are protected, and that will influence the things that you can do with your design. And the last one is the market overview. When you're never alone, or often you're not alone, when your client says, design a coffee machine, my coffee machine will be in the shop next to other manufacturers' coffee machines. And I have to take that into account. That's the big wrap-up. So in the end, little discussion. I invite you to join me, and I just have to explain a little bit why I'm careful with this discussion, because I'm not a car designer, okay? And when I worked at Art Center, car design is important. And when I joined them, they tried to make product designers feel like, if you don't make it as a car designer, you can still become a product designer. And I said, hey, okay, wait a minute, you know, it's not that simple. And some car designers, believe me, they are very much into, oh my God, muscle car, that's all I want to do. They are not into solving mobility, which I think should be their real task. So, but to make it short, I'm not a trans designer, and I'll show you a little bit. If you take one of the most beautiful Ferraris, in my opinion, Ferrari 308 GTB from 1975, and you shrink that to the size of a mouse, a computer mouse, it looks completely over-designed, over-complicated, over-complex. So the shape, all that looks too intricate. It wouldn't work. And if you take one of the best products, I agree it's not good that you have to charge from underneath, but I think it's one of the most perfect products within Apple and in general is the Magic Mouse. And if you would blow that up to the size of a Ferrari, it's just a blob, you know. So it's not the same thing. That said, I want to look with you at something that Love from Joni Ive and Mark Newsom, two excellent designers, have done. You know that this here, although most of what we see, Joni Ive here, is pretty functionalist design, right? It looks, I don't want to see it doesn't look exciting, because maybe it shouldn't look too exciting, because, or in the case is my girlfriend's picture in the front, that's exciting, okay? To me at least. So it's just a frame for what happens inside. And there's so many things happening that they wanted the frame to be super neutral. I respect that. But still there were days, and that's when Joni Ive started to work for Apple, where he did something pretty non-functional. Non-functional in the sense that he did care about, hey, let's get some fun in, you know, called Bondi Beach, surfing, Australia, yay, okay? And I don't say he went away from that, just said the company, Apple, Steve Jobs and Joni Ive, decided then to go a certain route. And now we look at this most recent design that I've seen from that company, Joni Ive, Mark Newson, the interior of the Ferrari Luce, the first electric Ferrari. Now, I have some car designer friend, and they already say, oh my God, an electric Ferrari. Doesn't it make, well, no, it doesn't. Although probably it has something where you can make it do that. And this is something I don't want to decide for you. I don't want to indoctrinate you. I want your opinion. So and to get your opinion, I'm going to tell you, I commented on LinkedIn, and I don't like to criticize colleagues, and particularly not esteemed ones. But here I said, let me ask some question. How would that look different for a Lamborghini? Other than there's a bull instead of a horse, okay? We're not talking about that. Would that be looking weird in a Fiat or Volkswagen? Then the steering wheel looks like sporty. The rest, does it look dynamic to you? Now, if I would be cynical, I would say if all you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail, suggesting that they can't do better. Both these designers can do wonderful things. But they didn't. They don't say it's not wonderful. I say they didn't do something else than same old, same old. That looks like an Apple car, okay? Is that good for Ferrari? Or is it good for Apple? Or is this good for... Well, I bet they get more money for that than I made in my entire life in design, but good for them. I'm not jealous. I think it's good when designers ask a lot of money. And since that concludes my presentation, I want to know from you what you think about that. Let me first conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.